Hey, this is Bryant Arnold, also known as Dragon from Skinwalker Ranch, and you're listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. It's another documentary review, and I've got Dan joining me for this one.
Hello. It's good to be here again.
And Dan, we've got a guest. If
We
you're
do.
watching this on YouTube, depending on how much Dan can be bothered, he might already have the guest's picture there, and you'll know who it is. Otherwise, it'll be a surprise if he fades it in.
It'll always be a surprise, yeah. I'll
Always
keep it a
okay.
surprise, yeah. We want the
Yeah.
reveal there.
We've overdone it now. I should have been like, oh, it's Chris Mellon, and then people would have been all excited. FYI, folks, I got a very, very polite knockback from Christopher Mellon personally a couple of days ago. He's just busy just now, he said, but at least he said no to me.
Yeah. He's engaging. That's something.
Yes. It's not Chris Mellon, Nathan, so I'm really going to disappoint people now by it's Nathan. Yeah. Nathan, as you'll know him online as Nathan, a waif soul, a long-time listener to the podcast, but obviously in his own right now, a very esteemed podcaster, researcher, commentator, bon viveur, entrepreneur, and any number of things. Nathan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Andy. Good to be here.
It's very good to have you on. And I wanted to get you on something for quite a while. And when this came up, I said to Dan, look, let's get Nathan on for a conversation. And the stars have aligned, and we're all here to talk about James Fox 2002 effort Out of the Blue. So I've got to say a very quick hello to my little brother, Zach, sorry. My little brother, folks, is just over from Australia to do a bit of a tour of the UK and Europe, and he's going to listen to the podcast. So he did ask for a shout out. So hi, Zach. There you go. There's a shout out. Now get back to your backpacking or whatever it is you're doing. Out of the Blue, James Fox, narrated by Peter Coyote. Is it Coyote or Coyote?
First one, I think.
Yeah.
Coyote.
Yeah. Do you know, ever since I started this podcast, it's like, is it Susan Goff? Oh, it's like, listen, it's Peter C. Okay, really cool voice.
To his friends.
Yeah, Peter C. to his friends, Pete to his friends. This documentary is one I've not watched for years, and I do mean years. It's available via various different platforms. I would always suggest, if possible, pay for it, rent it, buy it if you can, but it is available for free on various YouTube like channels, such as YouTube. It starts off with a shot of the Hubble telescope, which, given just recently we've had the upgrade of the James Webb. Yeah, very timely. Talks about the Drake equation, Drake equation being Dan. That's going to be one of your ones.
Oh yeah, do you want me to give you the Drake equation?
Succinctly, yeah. Tell us.
Sketch it out real quick.
But
the number.
I can do it, and it's just not going to be as good. It'll be like, aliens.
Is the number of civilizations in the Milky Way that are capable of producing signals that we can detect on Earth, times the rate at which stars are capable of supporting life in our galaxy, times the fraction of those stars that have a planet or planets, times the average number of planets per planetary system that have an environment that can support life, times the fraction of those planets that can support life on which life actually develops, times the fraction of those planets with life where intelligent life develops, times the fraction of those intelligent civilizations that develop technology for communication, and then finally times the average lifetime of those civilizations that develop technology for communication. So that gives us a very kind of big number still. But many years ago, like about 10 years ago, we didn't think there were any planets outside the solar system. Now we're up to about 10,000 exoplanets. So that equation, the result of that, has changed dramatically since this film was made.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but think the whole time this was introduced, because it's a couple of minute long introduction. While they're discussing the Drake equation, we're seeing these beautiful shots. We're seeing some interspliced clips. It was very late 90s, early 2000s, and it was almost like an MTV type production, where everything, where CGI was just coming in and computer graphics were getting a little bit better, and it was almost like, someone was just having a lot of fun with the computer systems. Bit of funky music behind it, overlapping videos. But if you date it, it's over 20 years old now. If you remember, though, it was a step up from traditional UFO documentaries that you would see. And I was like, yeah, I liked it. Got a little bit of a vibe and thought it takes you back to that kind of time, those early 2000s. Thinking, though, do you think this was being aimed at a bit of a younger audience? So we're probably just at the time of DVDs, or just before DVDs, maybe 2002. It was roundabout, yeah. You could get DVDs at that point, and obviously
Yeah.
VHS videotapes. Nathan, is this being aimed at a younger audience to get them into the UFO subject?
I mean, I think so. I just wish James Fox could make a good documentary. I mean, he just the guy. I mean, it's excellently done. I agree with you. It's definitely dated. Looking back and having obviously lived through that time myself, I think did a very solid job of kind of laying out a good argument. And as far as the graphics and the music, it's distracting to us now, sort of how I think about it. At the time, I think it would have been really kind of engaging because that's just what people were doing, trying to capture imaginations and things like that. And clearly he had kind of the things that he highlighted in terms of what was coming out or what was being discussed. And I think he was trying to kind of throw some weight behind some of these late 90s, early aught movements that were happening around that time.
Dan, we start to see some of those names, don't we, as well? Like your Corsos, Edgar Mitchells, and they're probably talking head clips now that we're very, very familiar with because we've seen them replayed so many times in the time since this documentary came out. But many people probably saw these for the first time when they were watching this because there was still no social media. The internet was still young and burgeoning. The internet speeds were still pretty low, pretty poor. So there was no streaming services. So this would have been the type of thing you would have picked up at a Blockbuster, a Global Video, a HMV, Virgin Megastores, whatever your kind of local places were. And I could imagine the different types of covers. And I used to remember going to those types of stores to get like wrestling VHS. And it was funny, UFO stuff and wrestling was always next to each other for some reason. I always remember that. And you would get like the what do you call it? The Ray Santilli? Is it Ray Santilli with the
The
I'm forgetting.
autopsy?
Yeah, the autopsy, the alien autopsy video,
Yes.
that would always be there, wouldn't it? You would always see
Classic.
that, and yeah, it's like really alien. And
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was presented by Anton Deck in the UK, or did they do a spin-off movie or something like that?
movie, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
They done like the movie. They were the guys in it. Yeah, I've never seen it and don't plan on seeing it either.
No,
to be
me
honest,
neither.
no.
So right next to WrestleMania, you had the alien autopsy.
Yeah, that was it. It was like they were literally there, but all those videos and VHS and DVDs had the same types of covers, so it was just the same kind of things repackaged. So obviously James Fox set out to do something here a little bit different at the time, and I've got a quote from James Fox at the end. I asked him the other day, "What do you think of this piece now, 20 years on?" And he's gave me a little summary of what he's really honest about it as well. So we get the title.
Interesting. Because this almost watched like a prototype for the phenomena, right? Like you could see the structure was there, and he had just updated it. And like you say, the CG got a bit better, and that's not really present in this at all.
Yeah, the out of the blue title screen comes up after 3 or 4 minutes, and I've put lovely early computer graphics. It's the kind of thing that if Dan presented to me now, I'd be sending him back to the drawing board, going, no, that's a really poor effort. So, first discussion point, okay, early on, we see some really interesting videos of various different UFOs that have been captured. Remembering we're looking at the peak of 90s video camera footage or 80s kind of footage here. And it was always of a certain standard. You can picture it right now in your head. It's got the timestamp in the bottom right-hand corner, it's got the time, and it's usually some woodland area with an object and the distance you can't really make out. Has that standard changed 20 years later? And are we too harsh on camera phone footage? Because now that we have camera phone footage, the general argument is that we should have better evidence than we do, with everyone having these wonderful cameras in our pockets. But do we underappreciate the footage that we have now? Dan, I'll go to you with that one first.
Yeah, I think we do. You look at the cameras that are present in home video camera systems, and those things, they have good optical zooms on them because they were bigger boxy bodies. On our smartphones, that's not the case. These things are made to take portrait shots of our pets and of our family and things like that. So when you bring up the standard lens on, say, an iPhone, that's a wide angle lens. So if something's in front of you, kind of given this peacocking display, having visited the Earth from somewhere else, you're barely going to catch it. It's going to be just a dot in the sky. So I think some of the footage that was present in this was actually better than some of the things you see posted to to Facebook or to something like that, where people kind of go, wow, I saw this thing. And it's hard to prove that it's not the International Space Station or a satellite or something like that. There's really not much data there.
Nathan?
Yeah, completely agree. I think we were also kind of desensitized to just all of the footage that we see with the cell phones, smartphones. Go outside on a full moon night, take a photo of the moon. It will look nothing like what you see with your own eyes, and you'll actually be pretty frustrated, even if you've got a great camera. So I think, we've come a long way in the kind of ubiquitous nature of what we can do, but I do tend to think that some of the older clips that we saw from those VHS tapes and whatnot are, pretty compelling. It's also interesting though, looking back at those in hindsight, kind of where we are now, and with what I would guess call the Mick West effect or something. You're looking at all this and going, well, maybe that's maybe that's this or that. Your mind is going through this checklist of things that you might try to discount whatever that footage might be. And that's just, I think that's kind of I would say that's the base where everybody begins now. We're kind of starting with a position of it's probably not something exceptional, and we're going through this checklist, and then it kind of becomes like a little bit forgettable in a way. Unfortunately, we kind of just put it in the file drawer with all the other videos that we're just bombarded with every day.
So I can go on my phone just now and download any number of apps that can turn my sitting room or kitchen into like an FX studio where there's explosions going off and, Spider-Man can swing by and all that kind of stuff.
As happens in the north of England.
As normally happens in my bathroom, yeah. And I'm thinking, though, back in the 90s and 80s, it was much, much harder for anyone to fake and add things in after production, as easy as any of us can do it now on our phones. So is it almost more credible when you see this kind of footage, as shaky cam as it can still be and as out of place as it can look? It took a much larger skill set, didn't it? And time and money and equipment to add an effect in afterwards. So some of this footage, like you say, again, it's odd and it looks really old, but is it better than what we probably see now?
There's a big portion of it is understanding what we're seeing as well. In this, there was a part where they were talking about fuzzy videos and things like that. And when we look at the Tic Tac video, sure, it's fuzzy, but it's not using a camera as we're used to seeing. So there's a whole bunch of education that goes along with seeing that video and actually understanding what you're seeing, the kind of the white heart, the black heart, that kind of stuff. And I think that area is where, debunkers and believers both, they kind of find their catnip, so to speak, because it's just, they exploit the lack of education out there, I think.
Yeah, and when you're looking at the VHS stuff, it's so bizarre, the behavior, the characteristics of what you're seeing, that couple of the saucer shapes that were in those pieces of footage, like they're so bizarre looking just generally that I think your default mode is like, I don't know what that is. That's probably something just prosaic, and I can kind of explain it away. But it's remarkable. I mean, like that's just like, and I think too about what people say when they actually have these experiences, that they see the saucers, they see, sometimes very, very close, and they're immediately kind of second guessing what they saw in person. So we're removed, at least once removed from that personal moment, and we're doing the same thing. I do think it's pretty compelling stuff, though. I like that old clip stuff. I think you're right, Andy, your point about the CGI, and it's probably less likely that they did a lot of editing. I think that's probably true.
I think you've got your own bias as well when you see a video of any of this stuff. And I've always said, like, what would real look like? Because imagine the day we do get to see one of these pilots has filmed one of these things next to them, and it would just look so different to what any of us could have imagined. So in your head, you look at someone's footage and you think, yeah, that's not what I thought it would look like. There's a famous picture, and you guys will know better than me off the top of your head. Full disclosure, I had a night out last night, so I'm a little bit croaky and my memory's kind of fuzzy. But it looks like a bell on its side, but it's flying through the air. It's not It's not the McMinnville one, is it? That's not, no.
I know which one you mean.
Do you know the one I mean? Yeah. And I always think that looks like someone has thrown like a bell you would get on a desk in the air and taken a picture. But why wouldn't one of these craft potentially look a bit like that, when it's flying through the air? So just because I don't see that as a sexy representation of, that's not a cool looking flying saucer or black triangle, doesn't mean to say it's not something really incredible when you can easily dismiss it as well. What it does move on to, though, is my favourite case I've mentioned for many, many times, is the Phoenix Lights event. And it gives a really nice recap of the Phoenix Nights, and thinking as well, this was at this point less than 10 years removed from the event. Still something that was pretty fresh. It's something that a lot of people might not have known about outside of the US, or if you were in those kind of UFO circles. Listener Steve asked me why this was my favourite case, and I just thought I would answer this really quickly. A few things. So it's a mass sighting. The number of witnesses that are unrelated and in different areas, but all looking at the same thing, sharing the same testimony, especially of the object flying over the city, blacking out the stars. I always thought that was really amazing to hear from lots of different people. And then obviously the cover-up that followed and also was torn apart by Governor Fife Symington, who instigated it, made a mockery of it. The people who hated that, it ruined his political career. And then he came out years later and basically said, yeah, I was told to do that. So I want to ask you both a quick question. Given this was the mid-90s, okay, would there not have been substantial data for the event that we've still never heard about, given the level of military technology that there would have been? So I keep seeing people with the US hearings that, let's hear about Roswell, da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, well, Roswell's going to be very limited in what we've got, and it'll be files and paper, and is there a craft still somewhere? Are there bits of something, Lockheed or Boeing or whatever? But the Phoenix Lights, surely they would have had radar, potentially satellite tracking, all kinds of things on this object that would be relatively good, incredible data that they could bring forward now. Dan, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I find it hard to believe they wouldn't have had satellites up there taking imagery where you could prove or disprove this event. It's one of the ones that you could put on the table, and I mean, if you prove it, you can prove the cover up. So there's almost a lot riding on an event like this. So for that reason, it wouldn't surprise me if they just kind of ignore it and sweep it under the rug, because you have the event, then you have the flare drop after the event, and a lot of people kind of conflate the two. But if we can prove that the flare drop happened because of that earlier event, it just raises so many questions in terms of questioning the authority that I think it would be a dangerous precedent for them to bring up, in their eyes anyway. I wish they would bring it up because, yeah, I think the cover-up is the easiest thing to prove here.
Yeah, and I agree, particularly if the object was as large as eyewitness accounts claimed it to be. I mean, a very massive object. I mean, how would that not have been seen on the nearby air traffic control tower, and I would imagine like recorded in some way, because it's a flight safety risk, and just as we all know the Kurt Russell story, he's coming into the area. I mean, he saw it coming in, so there's got to be some data there. Also, Phoenix is not that far from military bases and airfields that are in that area, part of the country. I mean, you're telling me they don't keep track of things that are kind of nearby, or particularly things of that incredible size. So I agree, and it begs the question: what kind of historical data do we have? How is it retained? I think I recall remembering Jeremy Corbell saying something about there's like a warehouse somewhere where all this stuff just gets like sent to. It's like, what's in that warehouse? I mean, surely this stuff is there. And to your point, Dan, I mean, one among many examples and events where if we just kind of took that folder out and put out the evidence on the table, we would kind of not be having this conversation anymore.
Dan, Phoenix Lights, if that happened 10 years later, mid-2000s, with the first camera phones were out, or even if it happened now, do you think that would be as big an event, or a bigger event? Is that something that would be that, oh, it definitely happened, or do you think we would still get it would be grainy video, it'd be nighttime, so you're going to get a lot of just kind of shapes moving against the sky, but with that many people, would that ignite the interest in the subject, or would the results be exactly the same?
I think it would ignite the interest, especially given the political kind of interest in this at the moment. You're not going to have someone like Governor Fife Symington making a mockery of it and making a mockery of the people who saw it and making them feel like they're being idiots. And, you're going to have a bunch of grown-ups at the helm that are actually interested in solving this and not bringing forward, well, he had an alien come out with him, or someone dressed as an alien come out with him and then reveal their face, and just kind of went, it's a bit of fun. Whereas now, like Nathan's talking about, we're considering this from a flight safety angle, from a national security angle, and that stuff is all at the forefront right now. So I think if it happens now, we get thousands of videos that all get kind of pooled into this mass data store, I guess. And yeah, it proves the case, essentially. I actually wrote in my notes here that I wish something like this would happen these days.
I love you had to correct yourself, Dan, that you said an alien walked out with him. Oh, well, someone dressed as an alien. And it was like, yeah, thanks for
you
clearing
never
that
know
one
these
up.
days. You never know. I posted
It's
something
true.
to Twitter the other day, and people took it seriously, and it was a joke about the CIA using highlighters that were black and not realizing.
Well, you know what the CIA would say? All you hear is all hearsay,
Very
apparently, as the
good.
line goes. Yeah.
Mhm.
The Phoenix Lights event, and I was thinking just this before. If it happened now, Sky News, and I'm sure other news companies would be the same, but I always heard that Sky News several years ago claimed they could be anywhere on the planet with a camera within 3 minutes. And you think if something like that did happen, surely the news cameras would be there on the spots if something was going over a town or city, getting mass reports. And you see it now, don't you? That if there's like something awful like a terrorist attack, within minutes people's camera phones are filming it, and news companies start picking it
Yeah.
up and relaying people's live images. People Instagram live it, they go live on Twitter, all that kind of stuff. So you would think there would be a mass social media live event happen. And yeah, that could hopefully be. Is something like that likely to happen again?
That's a good
Probably
question.
not. I mean, we talk about them being aware of us and our capabilities all the time,
Mm.
and I'm not saying that the visitors are sat there kind of yelling at Tim Cook as he announces the new iPhone, kind of going, "Oh, the resolution's gone up. We have to hide a little bit more now." But they'll certainly be. They wouldn't want to leave a big footprint. They wouldn't want to.
Well, why fly about over Phoenix in the mid-90s anyway? Then, like, because
Right.
it wasn't the most subtle thing to do, and that's always a bit of a it's an odd thing where they don't want to be seen, and they'll show us what they want to show us. Why fly about almost stealthily to the point where people could just make out the shape and kind of hide in plain sight? Shout out to Ross Coulthart. But
Nice, good drop.
yeah, thanks. I'm sobering up now. But like, why even expose yourself to that extent, or is that part of that trickster frustration aspect to the phenomenon where we're just here at the edge of your vision? But
Mhm.
it's that Doctor Who episode where you can see these things, but they're at the corner of your eye, and then when you look, they're not there. And is it that they're just always out of reach?
Yeah, I think this is one of those things that we're really going to have to work hard to understand. That to me, as this story continues to unfold and become more socially acceptable, we will look back at a lot of events in the history of this topic, and we'll kind of think, oh, that was, that sort of kicked off another sort of chain of events that then led to this, that, or the other. But then again, the sort of the other side of that argument for me is, human beings are very good at narrative construction, so we're very good at looking back at seemingly completely disconnected events and connecting those dots and saying, look, there's a story here. This led to this and that. So, I think I can see it from both perspectives. I'm very frustrated that we haven't had a sighting or an event to that scale. But at the same time, it very well could be just kind of part of how this is going to unfold. It's going to be one of those really enigmatic events that maybe started off some conversations or started off some some intense interest from those who experienced it, and that then catalyzed others to pursue this more vigorously. I mean, clearly that event was so impactful that James Fox made an entire movie about it 7 years later in 2009. I Know What I Saw, and you can see why. Just the number of witnesses, and it's a very, very compelling story.
You mentioned it, Andy. I think when you interviewed Randall Nicholson
I
about
was
the
literally going
aerial.
to
Oh
say that.
yeah,
Yeah, go on, go on.
You go ahead. You did the interview. I'll let you say it. Go
No,
for it.
just and I'm sure it's the same thing, but just the idea that maybe the aerial phenomenon incident happened at a time where it's not that point in time that's relevant. It's what's going to happen down the line and the people that are influenced, and that it's only that now the documentary is being made that the story should be told, and now is the right time to tell that story. And maybe the Phoenix Lights, it's the same sort of thing, that it's only going to be 25, 30 years later where in Congress we see some satellite imagery, or we hear about data, or it's confirmed actually something was there. And maybe that's the point that story becomes more relevant and a kind of bigger part in the disclosure movement, that it's taken that long for it to be important. And yeah, same could be said maybe for Roswell and any other event, that it happens when it happens, but the real impact isn't seen for decades and decades down the line. So I take it that's what you were going to bring up
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. You know, these things are seeded in essentially at the beginning of the age of communication for us. And then as we start being connected through things like the internet and mobile phones, the story kind of gets passed around and it starts catalyzing into something a lot more meaningful.
Mm. Yeah, it's in a way it's sort of it's materializing over time. It's
Yeah.
it's incredibly subtle in the past, and you get these little glimpses in these various different, seemingly disconnected moments and experiences. And as time seems to move forward, those events become more clearly understood, more crystalline, and then new events emerge, which are even clearer. And I mean, this may just be the trajectory that this entire sort of story is going to take. And to me, I like this idea, because it's a very subtle way of bringing this new reality into our human society. It's not hitting us with a hammer. It's really, kind of slowly acclimating us to this grander story here.
So I like an analogy, and I'm thinking that maybe it's like if at the side of a road you planted a seed for a tree, and the tree starts growing, but it doesn't interfere with the traffic or the road for a long, long time. But after 30, 40, or 50 years, the tree gets bigger. And it's still not on the road, but you notice it more. But then one day the branches are going to hold over the road, they're going to bend over, they're going to start hitting the cars, and people take notice and have to do something about it. So maybe it's just that point where it just takes a point for something that's been there forever to become more noticeable, to you have to do something about it. And maybe at that point, that's where these become relevant.
I like that. So at the moment, you would say that we're at the point where the branches of the phenomena are hitting our car windscreens, and we're going, "Oh crap, this is a bit dangerous."
Do you know what? No, they're not hitting the car windscreens. They're hitting the top of the bus. So the buses going along that are double deckers, it's hitting those. So only some of us are noticing, okay? But those of us who dare to sit at the top of the bus, the car scum don't notice
Cool
it yet.
kids.
Yeah, the cool kids who sit at the top of the bus, yeah. Any more on Phoenix Lights before we move on?
I just had that it was a really good example of we talk about these cover-ups all the time, that there are these kind of shady men in the shadows kind of trying to hide everything. And actually in this instance, it wasn't needed. Fife Simonson did everything that they would have been there to do, and he didn't need any influence at all. We perpetuate this stigma ourselves without any men in black.
That's right.
We hear a lot of scientists and experts coming up next discussing why great distance is a big issue when it comes to visitations from beings from other galaxies. So, again, this is us looking at a problem in a very human way, and I think a lot of scientists and academics have this same issue, don't they? It's almost like a roadblock for them. And I find it, again, I've said before on the podcast, it's incredible that so many scientific minds can be so reserved and like blocked off from looking beyond what we can do now, given what's happened over like the hundreds of thousands of years of civilizations. And that example of standing on a shoreline and thinking, how can you cross that ocean? Well, that's just us right now looking across the universe going, yeah, but we can't do that. But then someone comes along in like a combustion engine, and suddenly they can fly the oceans. And that's just as someone's ahead of us with that, they've solved that problem. Is that too simple an argument though? And are these people right that it really is such an existential leap that maybe we can't travel those distances and something else couldn't either?
Go ahead, Nathan.
Well, I completely disagree with that notion that, that we just can't do it. I think a lot of folks don't realize how much creativity is required in science. You do to do good science and really push the edges of scientific discovery, you have to be very creative and asking the right kinds of questions and creating the right kinds of tests for these ideas. And it's just not very easy to do, particularly if we're talking about ideas that aren't commonly accepted. So you just don't have a lot to sort of build off of there. I did like the point in the movie that they hinted at, that there's this sort of cycle of what is known and then like what the imagination says, what if we could do this, and how that then pushes the science later on. And it's kind of typically generational, so you kind of are born into the state of the world. You see what science is telling you is like what we can do, what we're capable of. And as a young person who's not bound as much by those constraints of a career or whatever, you're looking at that and going, ooh, what if we could do XYZ? What if we could just warp this or whatever? You're asking crazy questions. Well, those kids eventually become adults and scientists who end up pursuing those ideas, and that does push our science forward. So it's kind of this, it's frustrating, but it's also part of, I think, the way our knowledge just grows. We're not going to be able to get to some radical discovery. We rarely do anyway, just purely by accident. We're kind of getting there by pushing against the known, and sometimes violently. Sometimes we see something that's happening, and we're so antagonistic to that we can't accept it as truth, and we're going to be those pioneers who just kind of really push back against that, and we get these incredible discoveries, or we don't.
Yeah, I'm sure when humans took the first flight, there were a bunch of people that said, this is impossible, it's not going to happen, so on and so forth. And actually, it come down to two guys in a field doing it on their own and changing the entire world. You go back 50 years before that point, and everyone just has a complete different mindset as to what's possible. And suddenly, just by seeing that thing, a whole bunch more people got involved and developed the planes that we know today. But fundamentally, we're still using the same kind of technology. DJ would explain it that everything we make is based on a wing shape. So to see something that doesn't use that, and to have these kids growing up who are now starting to step into labs who think, what if this is possible? Let's just try. Let's go down this road and see what we can do. It's going to move us down that path of precision that we've been on since the transistor was made, and everything's getting smaller and smaller, and we're gaining control over those things. So we're going to be jump ahead 50 years. And we're going to have some insane technologies. There's a reason that OSAP was looking at things in this way.
I always love that picture of the left and right hand side comparison, and one of them's the iPhone, but on the other side it's got the Walkman, it's got the personal computer, the diary, and all this technology and all these things we had. And then it's like Steve Jobs and co came along and went, yeah, we'll put it in this, and it's in this tiny little device. And you look at the next iteration of that, 20 years later, look at those generations where you've got Elon Musk thinking, I can put a chip in everyone's head and it's going to have all that information. You won't need the physical device anymore. And, or you could do it with the Google glasses became a thing almost, and Apple glasses, or is that the way it's going to go? Who knows? But all these different technologies that just sometimes don't make it and sometimes do. Shout out to mini discs that were around for far too short a
I love
time.
my mini disc player.
Those things.
Yeah, they were just far too short a flame. But RIP to the mini disc. Some of the younger listeners will be going, mini disc,
gone but not forgotten.
Yeah, gone but not forgotten. Yeah, Google it. But yeah, so astronaut Gordon Cooper talks about the film he saw that was really interesting, but he never got to actually see the physical raw film footage. But talking about one of the landings, and there's a few things like that in there as well. Edgar Mitchell, who was a key name in the Wilson Davis memo, he discusses the different cover-ups and the pressure that officials were under to keep the UFO secret under wraps. Devil's advocate, okay, let's be for a moment, and Dan, I think you struggle with this sometimes, so I'm going to come to you first. Okay. Let's be on the side of the officials here. Why is it the right thing to keep all this information from the public?
Well, we've heard that, on a base level, let's look at what happened with COVID. People ran out, they panicked. You wouldn't want this explosive event that just announces that we're not alone in the universe, because a lot of people would freak out. So I can see why they would hold it back for that reason. But as well as that, we've been told that this technology is deceptively simple. And we also think that it outputs an enormous amount of power. So if it's simple and, it's used for destruction, we're not looking at 2 buildings being destroyed in New York now. We're looking at New York disappearing off the map. So I can understand why they'd be reluctant to share something like that. But from a more cynical point of view, if the US military had some technology like this, they would want that to be able to rule over everybody else, in a nutshell, right? They'd want that power for themselves and for no one else to have it.
Nathan, same question.
Yeah, to me, I'm in this camp of it's understandable why they would have tried to keep the lid on this. That maybe initially it seemed like something we probably had a decent grasp of, and you kind of hear about this too. There were moments in the history here where it looked like they were about to kind of come out and say, here's what's going on. But I think they realized it was much more complex than they initially thought, and to such a degree of complexity that we don't fully quite know what it is. And from my standpoint, as much as I hate this, we live in highly connected societies. We a lot of us have access to things that can do a lot of harm, whether that's just a vehicle you're driving, or if you live in a country you can buy a firearm. You can do some real damage. And I think the governments have a responsibility to study this to the extent that they can kind of understand what it is before they then just lay it on everybody's lap and say, well, good luck. Hope everybody can figure this out. We don't really know what it is. So hope you have a good day tomorrow at the office and take the kids to school. I mean, it's so huge. And So I do think that that's the reason why it's taken so long to get to this point, and why we still see that pressure against this coming forward, because I'm not sure that they really have the answers.
Staying with you, Nathan, how do you feel when you see astronauts coming out and talking on this subject in terms of being authority figures? I think we've got quite used to pilots and Navy personnel recently coming out, and CIA, intelligence officials coming out more and more. But Gordon Cooper, Edgar Mitchell, and others that have spoken, Buzz Aldrin, discusses the subject quite a lot, even now in his elderly years as well, which is great. Where do you sit as in terms of authority figures like astronauts coming out and chatting on the subject?
I think it's great. I think that they represent some of the best of humanity. They're often scientists themselves, though they've been pilots themselves. These are people who are highly trained, who are very rational. They're excellent under pressure. You can't be an astronaut if you're going to panic in a situation that's very stressful. So these are people that that you would want to trust with your kids. They're upstanding people in society, and I think that the more that they can come forward with their personal experiences and even their speculations, I think that that's incredibly valuable to the broader acceptance of this story and narrative in our culture. So I definitely welcome that, even if they have not had an experience, we're at least open. And I think we're seeing a little bit more of that now. They're open to this being something that could, in fact, be here, even though they themselves have never seen anything in space.
Dan?
Well, I was just going to throw in, I completely agree what Nathan said there about these being, very highly respected people, very experienced people. But there's some woo that comes into the subject through some of these astronauts, where I think it was Edgar Mitchell actually tried some kind of telepathy experiments and remote viewing experiments as he was off the Earth. And I don't think we've ever seen the results of those, but it speaks to how open-minded these pilots are.
I think we all expect astronauts that when they go up there that they're going to look out the window and, like, I suppose any of us would just be glued to the window, wouldn't we? And be hoping to see, oh, there's a saucer flying by. Oh, there's a fleet of motherships over there just behind the moon. And is that what it would look like? And it's probably not, but you would imagine or hope they would all see certain things. And some of the more modern astronauts, I always get mixed up whether it was Tim Peake or Chris Hadfield, had been quite derogatory about the UFO subject in terms of, I think the claim was, you're stupid if you think that any of
that
these
was Hadfield,
things.
yeah.
Hadfield, yeah, I thought so. And he's entitled to his opinion, but I just feel someone who's went up there and seen the enormity of space, for themselves, which must be just the most mind-blowing thing to see and comprehend. I don't think it's something that any of us could just go up and see and not be like, you have your brain melt, just because it'd be so hard to imagine what you're actually looking at, this void. But to come out and just say, oh, you're an idiot if you think any of these things are. So it's really interesting to have that comparison. And Buzz Aldrin has talked about monoliths on different planets, hasn't he? And again, you would look at the circles these people run in and their connections, but then do they get fed a little bit of misinformation? Do their own imaginations run away with them sometimes as well? And they hear what they want to hear with an interest in the subject. But yeah, it's great to hear these people. Obviously, many of them now having passed away. It would be nice if some of the present modern astronauts would come out and get more involved in the subject in terms of, let's talk about UFOs. And even if one of them came out, I suppose that would be huge if NASA could come out and say, well, we've got people on board the ISS just now and they're reporting an object, because we see enough footage of it, don't we?
Yeah, we have Tim Peake in the UK, who recently spoke up on a morning TV show. He was asked about it, and he spoke with respect on the subject, and he took it seriously. That was very encouraging to see, because I contacted him last year, and he was a bit cagey to speak about it, just didn't really believe it. Whereas now he's deferring to his colleagues who have seen these things, and when I say colleagues, I mean service members, and taking them seriously instead of deriding them like Chris Hadfield did.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, that what you just said there, it would be amazing if we had that kind of footage from the ISS. I mean, think about the impact that would have on society just to be able to put it all out there. Because I think that's almost like the tied up with a neat bow sort of image. You're already in space. We're in space. There they are. They're zooming up next to the porthole. I mean, that's kind of the classic experience that people might be looking for. So, it does beg the question, why not have that, and how much screening takes place of what is being recorded or shared from these platforms that operate in space.
With NASA being more involved now, and we would hope they're poring over this historical archival footage they must have, and Dan, we discussed this, didn't we? I would love if NASA would come out and say, look, all these videos, the tether incident, any number of things that could be something, and they came out and said, look, this one is definitely ice crystals, and here's why. This one is just junk in the background, and here's why. However, here are some actual videos that we truly think something anomalous is captured on camera, and we're investigating it. And do you know what? If we can get to that point, I would be happy as in terms of progress. People can, I think, want too much for NASA to come out, as if NASA's a sentient being in itself and comes out and says, yes, we know the aliens are true, are real, and we know where they are, and we see them all the time. NASA is like the government. It's a department. It's a company. It's made up of employees and offices and personnel and a board of directors and people making decisions. And there's no file in the office, is there, that says, oh, don't go in that one, that's got the alien stuff in it. So hopefully, I think there's still that really romantic notion that NASA could be really involved going forward in the progress of this subject. And that's where I hope the James Webb Telescope, I'd be really happy if, in terms of a real disclosure push, if you want to call it that, they spotted something with the James Webb. Like we heard that the rumors of Biden being handed a brief, and it was like, we think we've seen something and blah, blah, blah. Maybe something like that does happen. And the only confirmation we get for many years is we think we've seen something with the telescope. We think it's an object that's been made by something way out in the distance, and we have to investigate, but it's going to take some time. And that would be a nice soft drip disclosure, I think, for the public, because then people go, oh, NASA think they've found something, but really far away.
And we've had a kind of almost a similar thing. Remember when we found I think it was phosphine on Venus, and we thought that kind of said that there was life there. And since then, we found that actually it's probably not what we thought it was, but it speaks to the process of science that you'll get that drip feed, you'll get that peer review, you'll get people confirming it. It's not going to be. There was a document floating around when James Webb, when they put up the initial pictures. I think you said it to me, Andy, and just said, this is probably fake, but what if? How cool would that be? And it was basically saying that they'd found something already. And the big flag that went up for me was just literally how quickly that had happened. I think they would try and keep something like that under wraps, and you get kind of leaky places all over the world as different labs checked. But there would be a process, and it would take years, and we'd acclimatize to it. So by the time we got to confirming it, everyone on Earth would just kind of be living with the fact that we're not alone.
Yeah, this was the idea. They'd pointed something at Tabby's star, which their
right.
hypothesis might be there's a Dyson sphere been built around it, some sort of like physical object, and they've as an object of interest, they've pointed the James Webb at it and found something. And obviously, it's a heavily redacted document, but it came out, and it's one of those. It's probably not real. It would be very easy to mock up, but that's also what real would look like, I imagine, given it's just a document. So imagine Biden did get handed something and it's like, what do you want to do? And it was a case of, for now, let's just keep this to ourselves. That would be a pretty cool way for me, though, of having that kind of disclosure to the public because then I don't think it's a huge leap to, there might be things visiting here as well. And I think the general public at that point would start asking those questions and be more open to those conversations, because you just then bring things incrementally closer to home, don't you?
Yeah, at the moment it's nice and safe, right? Tom alluded to it in an interview. He said that we keep talking about these things as if they're from other planets, but that puts them really far away, and we don't have to be scared that these things are coming to our homes in the night and take us. It's nothing we have to be concerned with. But the reality seems to be that they're here, and that's a much scarier thing to face.
So bringing it much closer to home then, we hear of warheads being shot down by saucers firing beams of light at rockets. Apparently this footage exists, and these things are flying thousands of miles an hour alongside rockets. Documents are then shown that confirm the conclusion it was potentially an extraterrestrial craft involved, and the footage was taken away and not seen again. Maybe this is the sort of footage that would end up in some of these classified briefings. It might be something from the 80s and 90s that generals or your Rubios, your Warners, your Gillibrands are seeing now of, look, here's a missile that actually is being shot down by this object next to it, and we don't know what that is. That would be pretty cool. We see a much younger looking Robert Salas discussing the incidents we know of, like those at Malmstrom, where nuclear missiles have been interfered with by UFOs. I want to ask you, Nathan, why do we hear of some rockets being shot down or disarmed, yet hundreds, if not thousands, of incidents happen every year, including nuclear tests, and nothing happens? And obviously Lou Elizondo made that point himself, didn't he? That people wait on, if a nuclear war happened, don't worry, the aliens will save us. And it's like, well, they didn't stop all these other tests and that are being carried out all the time. So why did they do it sometimes, but then others they just allow to happen?
Right. Yeah. I know that Sallust kind of lands on this sort of argument that this is them, sort of telling us not to play with these kinds of toys, not to pursue nuclear power, to dismantle our warheads and that kind of thing. And to your point, Andy, I think that's kind of the really rosy view of that encounter. To me, it really it's an illustration of the high strangeness of the phenomenon. It's, yes, it's a flexing of their muscles, and it's, oh, look what they can do. They're very capable, can do pretty much what, anything that they wish to do with our technology. But I don't think we can take another step, another leap from that and say, oh, they're going to protect us from an all-out, sort of Holocaust or reactors melting down or whatever, because clearly that hasn't happened. There's been a lot of loss of life in over time with our experimentation with this technology, and they're not stepping in each time and saying, "Whoa, no, not this is a bridge too far." I just think that that's a very generous perspective on their motivations that is probably heavily influenced by our own biases, knowing how incredibly destructive these technologies are.
Mm-hmm. Dan?
We always talk about the idea of a more advanced civilization encountering a less advanced one, and we think, again, anthropomorphically, like about human history and the Spanish encountering the Mayans and so on and so forth, and how that rolled out. But I always like to remind people that though the general kind of broad stroke there seems to be that the more advanced civilization will wipe out the lesser one, there are loads of cases where basically the natives were helping the advanced civilization kind of do their thing. So it's not as clear cut as they're gonna kind of wipe out the less advanced civilization, but there's certainly an argument to be made that in those cases where the less advanced civilization has survived, they survived because they had warning, because they had time to prepare. And that's kind of where we are now. I think we can admit that this is real. We can prepare. We can start tracking these things, or we can bury our heads in the sand. And when they show up and they start, turning off these missiles again, we're screwed in a nutshell because they don't have any way. I say they, when the 10 missiles were shut down at Malmstrom, had a nuclear attack been launched on the USA, there would be no protection against that whatsoever. And though it might be an innocent thing and a way to demonstrate, hey, we're in full control, we can stop you doing these things if you want, it's dangerous to us. It's really dangerous. And they might not be aware of how dangerous that is.
Why not just go around and disable all the nukes worldwide permanently?
I see it more as a demonstration of how powerless we are in the face of them, as opposed to them saying they're going to save us or anything like that. That kind of thing doesn't make me laugh, but it makes me concerned because it's a little naive to think that anyone is here to help us. We always talk about, Stephen Greer says they're benevolent. Other people say they're malevolent. And truly, it's probably a spectrum like it is with humanity. You couldn't say that.
Yeah, what about the potential, though, that we always think that they're showing us something, but what if they themselves are testing their own equipment to, can we turn these off? And that for them, it's a test in itself of, yeah, that worked.
Yeah, quite possibly. And we heard from, I think it was the Italy cases in Unidentified, where they said literally that the only way to harm UFOs is when they're in a certain mode and to hit them with depleted uranium shells. We're talking nuclear material, so they could have just been trying to figure out a way to disarm us. We've often joked that them coming down and making us all kind of peaceful hippies and switching off our nukes is a really good way to get us to be defenseless if they want to take the planet.
Right. Maybe they have an area of effect as well. Maybe it's not, they can't do it sort of unilaterally across the board, that one UAP has a impact zone of, I don't know, 20, 30 miles or whatever. And that's just what they can do. It's an excellent question.
Yeah, cool. As we go on the documentary now, it's kind of over halfway. I think it starts to get repetitive, not necessarily in a bad way, but we start to hear from some Russian Air Force people. We hear about different sightings, different experiences. We hear about Rendlesham. We hear about Roswell, and it's kind of standard UFO documentary stuff. I don't necessarily want to sit and go over Rendlesham and Roswell and stuff again. I think they're very well documented cases. They've been talked about quite a lot. Is there anything before we start to kind of wrap up on the end of the documentary you two would want to bring in that you've got notes on at all? Dan, start with yourself.
I mean, so firstly, I'm only going to touch on Rendlesham here because in the segment in the film, they went to great lengths to say that there were no landing legs on the aircraft, and then they went on to show indents in the ground that they thought were from legs, and I was just like, well, which is it? What's going on? There's almost like two different stories here, and it tickled me immensely that it was Nick Pope that actually put that forward.
Former UFO investigator for the MOD, Nick Pope, as his title was.
Former filing secretary for the MOD. If people don't know, it was DI-55 that actually did the investigating for the UK, as opposed to Nick Pope. Nick Pope probably filed things, and they went to DI-55 to the actual people that did the work. I've always thought that it speaks volumes that Nick himself has never been to Calvin, although he rides that Calvin image and built a career out of it.
I know we've discussed that ad nauseum. I have nothing against Nick Pope at all, and let's say I've went to see him live years ago now, doing a talk and a presentation, and he's a really interesting character. But I think the general gist, again, folks, with Nick Pope is very short. But if Mulder and Scully had a receptionist outside their office, it would be like the X-Files were about the receptionist outside Mulder and Scully's office. Essentially, that's what it was. Yeah.
I would say so. The documentary went on to highlight NASA's kind of change in stance.
What if the Ghostbusters just followed Janine?
That'd be a pretty cool show. I can imagine Taika Waititi making that.
Yeah, she takes the call and then they go out, but the camera just stays on her for the rest of the episode. That would be it. Yeah,
pretty cheap show as well. That would work. I liked how it emphasized that it's a worldwide phenomena. We had Eisenhower brought up with the whole military-industrial complex and how that was kind of founded in the same era that the UFO kind of wave started. It highlighted NASA's shifting stance towards the UFO issue from quite derisive to now we actually have a funded study that's happening that they're gearing up for. So that's kind of a sea change there. And I also like that it highlighted the Cometa report from France. And I'd recommend, if people haven't read that, go read it, because it's as good as the documentary makes out. And right on the front cover there is that Lake Coast picture where a disc seemingly appeared in one photo that was they were taking basically a photo every so often, and in one of these photos it seems that a disc appeared, and we helped kind of release a higher resolution version of that with UAP Media not too long ago. So jump on UAP Media, anyone who's listening, and have a look at the photo. It's a very compelling photo, and we didn't conclude on it. It is what it is. Have a look, and just see how you feel about it.
Nathan, anything?
I think that Fox has done a good job here of making a broad argument for the validity of this topic. To me, it's quite impressive, and anyone who's studied this for any considerable amount of time, can kind of spot this as well. There's definitely a there, even with the sort of limited data that we have. I mean, and keep in mind that a lot of these sort of anecdotes and historical accounts and from Reagan and Carter and Ford and all these other presidents. I mean, this is stuff that we're just sort of taking at the top level and putting this picture together. There's so much more information that has to exist under that surface layer. If we've been able to kind of construct this, amount of a picture with just that kind of little bit of information, I think that should be pretty compelling to anyone. And I think James does an excellent job trying to methodically lay this out, that it's not just, a couple of weird witness accounts. It's a broader phenomenon. There's been, very official people who have looked into this. There have been efforts that clearly were designed to fail. There have been efforts that were much more productive. That's, the Cometa report is an excellent example of that. The only other thing that I, kind of wrote down, that other than Nick Pope with an exclamation point when he came on screen, was Nick Pope. He's very charismatic. I like listening to Nick Pope.
Is that like the Metal Gear Solid exclamation point, Nick Pope?
Exactly. Yeah. But what really struck me is something that we kind of touched on at the beginning of the conversation. Going back to Bob Jacobs and Robert Salas and their experiences there. And anyone who's kind of studied those guys a little bit know that they put out a book called Confessions, which basically reveal they're both experiencers. So I've been playing with this idea that if there's no sort of linear time, that that there's sort of a causality, like we think of causality in terms of this happens and then this next moment this thing happens, and we're looking at our stories in that way too, very sequentially. If you kind of throw that notion out and think of time more sort of as a block universe, or time can flow one direction or the other, a lot of these experiences in some ways make more sense to me. That these guys who were right there when these events occurred also happen to be experiencers. It makes me wonder if there's some kind of deeper connection, almost like a deeper tuning that they have to the events themselves. Because when those things happened, they're portrayed to us as these sort of passive participants in just doing their jobs. But what if that's not really the reality? What if it's something much more complicated, that they themselves have a part in what was actually taking place, that they are related to the event in some deeper way that we're just not really seeing, because we only think of it as a sequence of things that happen.
I think oh, go on, Dan.
I was just going to say the work of Gary Nolan and the Codex Putamon. We also look at the kind of the spindle cells. All of these experiences seems to have these things in common, and we often ask ourselves, do their encounters cause this change in their physiology? And I agree with Nathan. There might be something there that says these people are more likely to experience this because they have a physical difference.
Yeah, some of the stuff, again, just to finish up on with the lines that an astrophysicist is talking about, Blue Book, the Condon Report, and these sorts of things, and that pressure from Congress led to these studies that ended up not being open studies. And a lot of what they were talking about in terms of what they were trying to do at the time, I think the citizen hearings were touched upon very, very briefly. It sounded a lot like now in what's happening now. Even that the final lines are about, we need military officials willing to testify, but need immunity from their security oaths. And I think here we are 20 years later, and we're hearing that language is being written. And we've almost got to that point, and it's been a big gap. I mean, I suppose the disappointment is, if you watched this 20 years ago, you'd be like, oh, we're just on the verge of this happening. And is this, to bring the subject full circle back to that frustration of people in ufology or fans of the UFO topic who have been invested for 40, 50, 60 years, who see what's happening now, and they see folks like us, who they would see as newer to the subject, getting all excited about hearings and immunity language, and you've got Lou Elizondo's and Gary Nolan's, and they're all really great, and they're making us progress, and they're looking, going, yeah, I saw this 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, and 40 years ago. So you can kind of understand that cynicism from that point, can't you? Where you go, actually, this documentary's final minute or two could have been about now, and just picking up from there.
Yeah, I think that's almost why I saw this as like a prototype for the phenomena, James Fox's more recent documentary, because it really is kind of like he kept making the same documentary, but just updating it. And really with the phenomenon, he kind of hit the nail on the head. And I think that at that moment in time was the best documentary that could have been made on the subject. And I would say the same for Out of the Blue, in fact, as well. When it was made, it was probably the best thing it made. And when I was making the thumbnail for the show, a lot of the posters for the film I came across actually had a quote from Michael Shermer, who is kind of the lead of Skeptic magazine. And the quote was, "Out of the Blue emerges as one of the very best films produced on this subject, one of the most interesting subjects in the history of science." So to convince Michael Shermer that this was a film worth people's time, I'd say it speaks volume about the film.
I'm going to come to you both in a minute and ask you for your overall thoughts and a rating out of 10, and do you recommend? I'll give you the James Fox quote, though. I texted James a few days ago and told him we were doing this, and asked him for a quote. And James said, "I've had a dream to create the seminal feature-length documentary film on the UFO topic since I was in my early 20s. Out of the Blue is a product of an 8-year attempt to do just that. I think ultimately, as proud as I am of it, I failed. But the lessons I learned along the way and that long journey were key to getting the phenomenon created." So I think you both touched on that down the line, we've got the phenomenon out of those early attempts at what Out of the Blue. And then I know what I saw was a bit more of a microscopic look at one incident and one event. And then eventually we've got the phenomenon from it. And soon to have Moment of Contact, which again is a bit of a look under the microscope of one event, of the Virginia incident. And then the phenomenon 2, which hopefully comes out in the next year or so. I think I would expect that next year, to be honest. But yeah, fair quote. Let me come at you, Nathan, first. You're the guest. Overall thoughts, and do you recommend and a rating out of 10?
Overall thoughts. I think it's excellent. I think, as you pointed out, at the moment that it came out, it was probably the best piece of work that had been done to date. In terms of the title, I'm a little bit confused. The title doesn't, to me, grab you or
Did you think
make
water,
me,
like it was going to be more focused on, like there was something to do with the oceans or UFOs in the oceans, like
at least something, right? I mean, I couldn't find a corollary of the title to anything that really happened in the documentary. So that was a little bit perplexing to me. It's not something that you could go, hey, you should watch this, and they'd be like, what does it mean? What am I going to get from that? So maybe that was a takeaway that he had. I don't know. But in terms of a training moment or learning moment in his documentary progress, 100%. He's obviously refined his craft very, very well. I would give it, kind of placing it in its time. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10 for a UFO documentary. It's really well done. It's not hokey. Yes, we kind of can chuckle about the effects or the maybe the sound that they were using kind of throughout the film that really started to bother me toward the end there. But those are really more, I think, products of the time. But in terms of the quality of the content, I thought it was really, really, really top notch, and I would definitely recommend it to folks who might be interested in looking at this from a more historical perspective. And then the last thing I would say, to your point that you made, Andy, about kind of feeling like we're on this hamster wheel. Is this ever going to break? Are we going to break this cycle? Because it does very much feel as if we're kind of at the same juncture we were 20 years ago, and I know there were points before that felt the same as well. When is the dam going to break? And I really think that we don't know, but to me, you can see that efforts like that and efforts that are happening now are kind of pushing this a little bit further. It's becoming more acceptable to talk about it in the wider public. That documentary, as great as it was in 2002, you couldn't have a conversation about it, in on CNN or something without getting just laughed off the screen. Versus now we have people who are on there and happy to talk about it and engage in it. People are curious and interested. To me, that is a real sign of hope and optimism.
Awesome. Dan?
So the last film we reviewed was the one with Shatner smoking cigarettes heavily and being like the cigarette smoking man in the X-Files in the back of the office and just waxing lyrical about UFOs. So
I mean,
in my
Dan
mind,
Dan Aykroyd.
Oh, Dan Aykroyd, sorry, not William Shatner. My bad.
You
Yeah,
text me Shatner,
I'd
and I
watch
was
that,
like,
though.
why is he calling Dan Aykroyd Shatner? But yeah.
I promise I did watch it.
Is that on Only Dance or?
Oh yeah, onlydance.com. That's what you'll find that one. It's just full of UFO content. But I thought this was much, much, much stronger than that movie. That movie felt like just one guy telling a bunch of stories that may or may not be true. This one kind of laid out a case over history that, as Nathan said, shows that there's a there. The cover up is really palpable in this. You can see the dominoes there, and it leads directly to this modern day thing. So I would highly recommend it. I love that they fell back on documents. I love that they fell back on the officials. There was very little woo. It's kind of what I would call a nuts and bolts documentary. But it does highlight the fact that we have a lot of questions and very, very few answers. And when you guys were talking about Out of the Blue and what it could mean, I thought, well, how awesome would it be if there was a USO documentary or a documentary that just focused on exploring the idea of where are they from or who are they, and just kind of put all this maybe off of the table. So I think that's what we're going to start seeing maybe in the future. And I'd love someone like James Fox to make that case. But for now, I would give this 9 sources out of 10 and only 1 source less than 10, just because it's not quite the phenomenon. And we haven't quite gotten to that huge bit of movement that we've seen in the past few years. The peak of this is essentially the National Press Club hearings, which weren't proper hearings, but I think we can all agree that if the congressional hearings looked more like those, we would have had a lot less bad stuff to say about them.
Yep, I will agree on an 8 out of 10. Do you know what? Maybe a 9 out of 10. However, the way I look at this documentary is I saw The Shawshank Redemption years after it was made.
I'm so curious where this is going.
It's seen as like a classic movie with an incredible story and a wonderful twist at the end. But by the time I had saw The Shawshank Redemption, I had seen so many other movies that came after but copied that And that ending to me wasn't much of a surprise, but I had seen it replicated and parodied in so many other things that I went, but if I realise and remember that actually that was the first movie to do that, that twist was quite unique to that film, then I think you can appreciate it more. So it's a 9 out of 10 if I realise that this documentary, at that point, if I take myself back to 2002, yes, this was the pinnacle of that work and forget everything that came since. But yeah, given that it's that kind of, I'd seen some of this stuff before, even though it might have been the first time some of that footage was used and the way it was put together, I think a solid 8 out of 10 for me for this one. I'd definitely recommend people watch it, especially in light of even just those closing scenes that, and closing comments and quotes that literally could be now. And it just gives you that kind of food for thought. And Dan, wondering about that USO documentary, is that something the Phenomenon 2 at least has a focus on? Given what the Phenomenon had its individual parts, and it talked about the metamaterials, we saw the aerial school phenomenon, we saw various bits and pieces, the work going on in Congress and in the background. Do we hear more about, Catalina and the incidents that are ongoing? Do we hear more from pilots? Is that something that maybe James works on as part of that? So yeah,
I'd love to see James, once Lou's book is out, maybe James can make a documentary kind of laying out those events and focus completely on Lou's experience with the phenomena and the DoD.
Well, I think if the picture Jeremy Corbell put up last week was anything to go by, someone might be trying to work on that documentary with Lou already and getting ahead of the game there.
Yeah, we'll have Mickey Rourke playing Lou Elizondo on screen and mumbling his way through 2 hours.
Sponsored by Saucer Co. And just to finish up, folks, listener thoughts. A lot of you got in touch. That one was for Dan. Barry said this documentary was and probably still is the best UFO documentary ever made. Not only was it compelling that it was made with high quality, it was mesmerizing, and the no one place it was mesmerizing, and the no one place I always pointed people to. Okay.
Number one place.
Yeah, number one place.
To,
yeah,
sure.
There's no full stop there, Barry. I'm leaving that in so people can hear me, my thought process. It was mesmerizing, and the number one place I always pointed to for them to learn about the phenomenon. Melanie said, James has a big fan in me. I love his work, his passion for the subject, and how well he represents it. Ryan said, has anyone ever mentioned where such a large craft, I think he's talking about some of the objects discussed, if it was man-made, where could it actually be hidden? I don't know, quick discussion point on that one. If we did have these huge big crafts that were flying over Phoenix, for example, where are they going?
It's just looking for a parking place. Sometimes you have to go around the car park a few times to find that right spot.
So we're thinking like a wrong turn and looking for a parking spot, and it's just going round and round. But the best place to hide something like that would be the ocean, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, so in the ocean or in a mountain, but the ocean's probably easier because you'd have to build inside a mountain. But yeah, but rumours are rumours, aren't they? But yeah, cool question. Yeah. Dylan said, I appreciate James Fox, but I'm tired of the personal eyewitness stuff. Nowadays, you need more than that. Eyewitnesses by nature are unreliable. If you ask 10 of them what an orange looks like, you'll get 10 different versions, all in my opinion. Fair enough, Dylan. Totally valid. Steve says, I think James is great. Out the Blue is a classic, which I absolutely adore. Can't wait for the podcast. Well, here you have it, Steve. William said it's one of the best documentaries on the phenomenon ever. Probably the best. Superb craftsmanship. Lynn said she watched it a couple of years ago, laid up in bed with the flu, and she watched it as well as Stephen Greer's. She felt James Fox's documentaries are better research with no self-promotion, and that's what she loves about him. And then again, Steve, Sally, Emerson all said amazing, one of the greats, totally loved it. Thank you very much for all of you sending those in. Dan, Nathan, thank you very much for both of you joining us. That was fun. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Nathan, once again, I no longer have to miss you now. I can see your face.
I know. It's always a pleasure, gentlemen.
We'll get Nathan back on. Don't worry, it's been too long. But thank you once again, folks. And next documentary, I am thinking, you can give me your opinions on this, the Dorothy Isaac documentary that's on Amazon Prime. Loads of people keep asking about that. People are commenting on it. Some folks have seen it. Some folks said they were going to see it. I think that's probably...
Capturing the Light? Is that what it's called?
Capturing the Light. Yeah, Dorothy Isaac. I'll tell you straight off the bat, I've seen some of those compelling pictures. I don't think they're so compelling. However, I've not seen the documentary for a long time, so I'll go back to it, and we'll do that one next. Yeah. So thank you very much, and we'll speak soon. If, like me, you have ever had to go looking for a designer, illustrator, or voiceover artist, it can be difficult to know where to start. That's where the folks at Fiverr have created the world's largest marketplace for digital services, with an incredible database of talented freelancers to cover every one of your business needs. Whether you need a new website, a voiceover for your podcast, or someone to manage your social media accounts, Fiverr has you covered. The unique term for a service offered by a seller on Fiverr is called a gig. When creating gigs, sellers can choose their starting price point. Sellers can take this a step further and offer gig packages to buyers using those gig packages. These contain multiple price ranges, and sellers can offer buyers various and tailored service packages. In this way, buyers can pick and choose from all that's offered according to their particular requirements. There truly is something for every budget, with your payments protected every time. That's really important. Your payment won't be released until you approve the work, so there's no paying for work that isn't of the required standard, giving you the complete control you need to get the perfect product for your business. And for more peace of mind, Fiverr's support team are available 24/7 to answer any questions or provide the help you need. So if you've been fishing around the net for the right solution, stop. Use the perfect solution and go to Fiverr, that's Fiverr, and find the perfect freelance services for your business today. You can help support this podcast by using my special link, zen.ai/UFO5, that's zen.ai/UFO and the number 5, the next time you need to book a freelancer. Details are in the description. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/thatUFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFOUAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass. Meditated game of state full on meta. I can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself. Then I climbed out the window after the elf. And I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems. And they think I should seek therapy. And I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? But if we're being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life,